this store does not exist. One of my favorite things about Overwatch and a lot of other games is all of the art and all of the other details that are spread around the map just to make it seem more vibrant and more alive. Such as, in this case, all of the different stores that are set up around New Queen Street. They didn't need to put all this effort in to make all of these unique stores, and a lot of them have really cool visual effects on the signs or any other aspects of the storefront, even though they're just locations to decorate the space and make it feel more like a real lived-in location. And it's because all of that effort is put into making it look aesthetically nice that I think it's kind of always funny when, due to some reason or another, be it the map's design changing for gameplay purposes, you'll have these little areas that have so much attention and so much care put into them to make them look nice and pretty, just like this one particular store, that they kind of just end up ignoring the laws of reality itself and cannot actually exist. To showcase that more easily with this store, I can place down a Symmetra ultimate directly through the front door, and as you can see, if I round the corner, this wall is going straight through the back end of Tom Beanson's. There's absolutely no way that you could fit an entire storefront within this tiny 2 inches of wall space. It also doesn't take into effect, these windows that, you can't see them on the other side. This entire store cannot exist, but it still has all of these visuals and unique signage that were made just for it. Because, maybe at some point during development of the map, there was room for another store here, but then for one reason or another, during playtesting, they end up changing the map's geometry. Maybe Tom Beanson's wasn't, drilled into the side of this wall and it was just, a little store on the corner, and it would have made sense for there to be room for a noodle house here. But regardless of the reasons that it did exist before, it simply cannot now. And with places like this non-existent building that breaks the laws of reality to try and exist, it got me thinking, if you were to take all of the buildings designed from the Overwatch maps that were just designed with aesthetic purposes in mind and not really, the stuff that troubles us in reality, such as having to be structurally sound or having to actually make sense that there can physically be a building in that location or designed in that way. Basically just taking the goofy little maps and buildings of Overwatch and really taking them much more seriously than is ever reasonable. What building would be the worst designed building in Overwatch? And I'm going to forgive the non-existent noodle store because it is a minor artistic choice on a map. And instead, my choice that I'm going to make an argument for is a building that is much more prevalent in the lore, considering that it's the namesake of an entire map. And that is Lizang Tower from the map Lizang Tower. Now, I am putting Lizang Tower as my argument for what could be one of the worst designed buildings in Overwatch for one thing that we find on the control point map that actually takes place inside of the tower, and what this view from the inside of the tower can tell us about the map. And the biggest thing that it can tell us about the map is that this floor of the tower is a fucking death trap. That's right, there's a good reason why you're dropped off in the middle of this building via an aircraft, because that makes a lot of sense, and that is because this entire floor has no entrance or exit. There is no way to get to this part of Lizang Tower without coming on some kind of aircraft, which is a whole nother problem with the design of the tower that I'll get to later, as right now I'm just gonna focus on what we can learn about the building from inside of it on this point. But yeah, you'd think like, oh, maybe one of the random off to the side rooms that nobody ever fights in because it's not, the main point of the map, just has some kind of door JPEG plastered onto the wall that you could reasonably look at and say, oh, well, this door must lead to, the stairs, or, an elevator room, or some way to get to other parts of the building. But no, there are no doors on this map that could be reasonably assumed to lead to, stairs or anything like that. There's just nothing. These two little rooms that have an office in them, there's nothing. Heck, this office even has a wheelchair in it for some reason, despite the fact that this building might be the least wheelchair accessible building of all time, considering the fact that it's not even accessible at all unless you have some kind of personal aircraft. And then even if you wanted to get into this room, there's 2 sets of stairs on either side anyways, so good luck getting a wheelchair in here. And even then, it's a little bit weird that that's here, because this desk actually has a picture of Winston and Winston. For Overwatch lore, Winston, the gorilla, raised on the moon. They did genetic experiments on him, and he became super intelligent, so he was basically placed under the tutelage of another scientist there who taught him to read and write and taught him about science and gave Winston a love for learning. And that scientist was called Dr. Harold Winston. And of course, being a gorilla, Winston didn't really have a name. He just had, you know, an experimental code name because he was an experimental, genetically engineered gorilla. So when all of the space gorillas revolted on Horizon Lunar Colony and killed all of the scientists, Winston kind of took Dr. Harold Winston's name as his own. So you can see a picture of them together on the desk, implying that this is, you know, Dr. Winston's desk. Especially since, you know, the Li Zhang Tower is home to Lucheng Interstellar, which is, you know, a Chinese company that specializes in the space industry in the lore of Overwatch. So it would make sense that, you know, Dr. Winston would work here. But that still doesn't explain the wheelchair, because we can see Dr. Winston in actual cinematics, and he is a completely able-bodied person. And he's also now dead, so I don't know why they haven't just given someone else his office at this point, or why there's specifically a wheelchair in here, because the other office on the other side, because these maps are mirrored, has a standard office chair from some guy that plays Hearthstone. So I don't know, maybe the secret lore here is that they're implying that if you don't play Hearthstone, somebody's gonna break your kneecaps and you're gonna have to use a wheelchair instead of getting an office chair. I don't know. But back to the main point, which is that there's no doors anywhere in this room. Not even like a door JPEG just plastered on a wall. Anywhere in this entire building. There's just nothing. If you were to get onto this floor, you can only leave via some kind of aircraft or in a body bag, which is just incredibly poor planning from whoever in the Overwatch universe designed this tower, and was just like, yeah, let's just make this one floor that you just can't get to. And I mean, details like this can be found on a lot of other maps. One of the other points of Li Zhang Tower, the garden point, if you were to go into White Room on this part of the map, you will actually see that the back of White Room has 2, what I assume to be elevator doors, and if you go outside and you look up, you can see, wow, this connects into the main part of Li Zhang Tower. That's a really cool way that these maps are shown to be connected to each other, even though the actual point that takes place on Li Zhang Tower doesn't have any kind of details like this, so that yeah, the playable area is connected to other parts of the tower. Or really, some maps of Overwatch are really bad about having these kinds of details, and they just seem like this isolated pocket dimension, basically, where there's no other way that you could reasonably get to these places, which I think is sad. I wish that a lot more games would put a little bit of care into how these levels feel to play. I like when different playable parts of maps feel like they're part of a much larger interconnected world. Like Rialto is a really good one, with all of the rivers around the map. Havana has, you know, that blocked off road that you can see the massive building in the background. Those are 2 maps that do a really good job of making it feel like, yeah, this is a part of a much larger location. Blizzard World as well, with one of the spawn doors, you can see the entrance of the park. You can see all of these other locations in the park. In the distance, there's Murloc Island out there. Again, more places that just seem like they're part of a much larger world. But that tangent aside, back to Li Zhang Tower. And back to how having to guide an aircraft near a building as your only means of getting onto that specific floor might just not be that good of an idea. And that is because the entire surrounding area of this specific floor of Li Zhang Tower is actually surrounded by vital support structures that help keep the building standing, as support structures generally do. Meaning that by design, you're going to have to guide a giant aircraft through vital support structures in order to actually get people onto or off of this one particular floor. One minor mistake by the pilot, or just some bad winds created by the building, or just bad flying conditions, and we will find out if in the future world of Overwatch, if future jet fuel is able to melt future steel beams. And I feel like the answer would probably be yes, and that you could possibly cause the entire building to collapse if you were to make a minor mistake flying an aircraft through these support structures. And it's not like you have a lot of room to work with either. Using the measuring tool of Overwatch, which is Tracer, because Blink moves you a distance of exactly 7.5 meters, we can measure out the approximate length of both the drop zip that drops you off at this location and the distance between the two steel beams that you're going to have to guide yourself through, or whoever presumably pilots these drop zips. I'm assuming that it's someone on Overwatch that's piloting these things, but I mean, who knows? It's just completely empty aside from the 5 other people that are on your team. Maybe the guy that got laid off when we moved to 5v5 from 6v6 is the one that's piloting the drop zip. They had to give him some kind of job so he wouldn't be out of work. And bring him back on for a few test runs, so maybe that'll do well. Hopefully. Hopefully it'll work out and it'll still be good. But measuring the total wingspan of the drop zip, we find that it's about slightly under 5 tracer blinks. You could maybe say it's, 4.7 tracer blinks, which is approximately 35.25 meters. Next, for the distance between the two steel supports, the largest gap possible in the building, we find that they're roughly 6.2 tracer blinks apart, which would be 46.5 meters. So you'd have roughly 1.5 tracer blinks worth of error when you're trying to pilot the drop zip through this gap, which is 11.25 meters, which I feel like isn't that much considering everything that's able to go wrong when trying to pilot an aircraft. Turbulence, just, pilot's error, maybe some aircrafts are even bigger. Maybe they don't intend for a giant drop zip to be putting people off here. But in general, it doesn't seem like it's a very good idea to make the only way to get to this floor of the tower via an aircraft. Just slap a door JPEG onto a wall and call it a day. And just, be like, oh, presumably these are the stairs. You can just go on the stairs to get out. And then the world is saved. Liu Tower is now a pretty decently designed building for the most part, but this one minor oversight I feel like is just kind of funny. Just unintentionally creating a floor that's actually a death trap that has no means of entering or exiting it aside from being dropped off by some kind of aircraft. And even then, it's not really designed so that you could drop people off very easily using an aircraft, because the floor is also surrounded by steel beams that are integral to the building being structurally sound. You fuck up even slightly, maybe your pilots had a bit too much to drink, or maybe, it's a little bit windy that day, you're going to be seeing a repeat of a rather historic event, probably. But yeah, that's my argument for why I believe Liu Tower is actually one of the worst designed buildings in Overwatch if you were to look at it from a more realistic perspective. Let me know if you've ever noticed any other impossible buildings, or buildings that just don't quite make sense, like the Noodle House that is just there, but it's not there. Honestly, my own personal lore is that the owner of Tom Beanson's actually sets up that fake storefront in order to trick people into coming to buy coffee. Because, I mean, all you gotta do is you make a fake storefront that seems really appealing, you give it some good reviews on Yelp, so that people are gonna Google local noodle places near me, and they're gonna see, oh, there's this noodle house that has really good reviews, let's go check it out. They're gonna go on over there, mosey on over. They're gonna look at it. It's gonna say it's closed, and that's because it's not real. He just permanently has a closed sign on the door, and then people are like, oh damn, I guess maybe we can go somewhere else. Oh, there's a coffee place. Let's go to Tom Beanson's and get some coffee. And that's his way of trying to get a little bit of extra business. just decorating his store with a fake storefront for a different store. Maybe that's illegal, but I think it's funny, which is why I give this store a little bit of a pass, because I like that little explanation for it. But yeah, I'm sure there's other buildings in Overwatch that just don't quite make sense from an architectural standpoint. You could share your favorite one in the description. In real life, I am an engineer. I got an engineering degree, and I work with designing the layouts for a bunch of different facilities. So maybe I can go look through some more of the buildings just from my own perspective, if there are just a lot more buildings kind of like Lizane Tower or the Noodle House that just don't quite make sense. Also, like and subscribe for more Overwatch stuff, because there's a lot more smaller details. I just talked about the buildings themselves, but there's so many cool things that players just never see. That's just how much care is put into the smaller details on some of these maps. Like, you might not even know this, but some of the small stores and businesses in the game have their own, like, little theme songs and jingles that play when you're in them that you'll just never notice during regular gameplay. Here on New Queen Street, one of the forward spawns for one of the sides is the Egg House. And the Egg House actually has its own little song that you can hear if you just, like, hang out for a little bit, go to someplace quiet. You can hear the little egg song. I'm gonna call it the egg song because it's the Egg House. But yeah, there's just cool details like that that a lot of players probably don't know exist and never will, because why would you ever just stand in spawn? Why would you ever even look around spawn? Spawn points are like a place where there's so many small details that players spend a lot of time in these places. Some players a lot more time than others, and yet they don't turn around, so they don't even see a lot of the stuff that's actually decorating these different spawn rooms. And it's kind of cool if you take the time to turn around and look at it. So yeah, thank you for watching, and until next time, see ya.